started, if you guys would please take a look and get acquainted with the GoToWebinar screen in front of you. You should see an area for chat and Q&A. And at any point during the webinar, you can post a question there, and we'll get to that at the end during our Q&A section. Also on Twitter, you can leave any questions or comments by using the hashtag Fpwebinar. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Everybody, welcome to Data Security Best Practices in the Hybrid Cloud. Again, this is another Fpwebinar, and again, that's our short, to-the-point webinar series that provides basically an expert's overview to your cloud and SharePoint concerns. So feel free to take a look at any of our past webinars online, share with any friends you think they may help. Also, please remember we finished to fill out the survey that pops up. This basically tells us kind of what we need to cover next, right? So again, if there's something that you guys want us to cover, we want to make sure we do that in the future. Also, I almost forgot, but one lucky attendee will win a copy of Microsoft Windows 8 Pro, and all you have to do is be present throughout the entire webinar to win that. Today is actually a special webinar because we're joined by our partners at SharePoint, and we're going to discuss what confidentiality and availability implications SharePoint organizations need to consider when choosing a private cloud, a public cloud, or both in a hybrid environment. We're going to discuss data security strategy, along with some of the security challenges with the cloud, and how you can also help close that gap. So now, before we get to business, just want to take a minute to introduce the speakers today. For those of you who have attended some of our previous FP webinars, you'll recognize me. I'm the goofy-looking guy on the left side of the screen. As it says, my name is Jesse, and I'm our VP of Sales here at Fpweb. So I've got a varied background, different roles consisting of managing support and sales teams to also being an engineer and a sales engineer over about the past 15 years. So I like to say I'm dangerous enough to speak on most topics, but for more in-depth items, we actually bring in the really smart people, and that's why we brought in Mike Fleck from SharePoint today. So Mike, you want to take a minute and just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say, but the smart guy couldn't join today, so I'm here instead. Yeah, Mike Fleck, the co-founder and CEO of SharePoint. I like to tell people I'm at least 49% technical. Been in the security space since the late 90s. Was in network infrastructure and server and application capacity planning and performance management before that. And before that, started life as a software developer and network administrator. And SharePoint is, laser focused on data security. We've been in the market about 4 years, and we're really kind of the first movers with a strong data security solution for SharePoint. And then again, last fall, came out with some additional products, for public cloud environments, private cloud environments. We're sort of first movers in that realm too. So we like to sort of stay on the forefront of this. And really kind of focus on thought leadership and understanding what the issues are today and what they're going to be 6 months from now.
Great. Thanks, Mike. We're actually going to start off with a quick poll. If everyone would take a look at the question that's about to be on your screen, and that is which deployment option your company is using today or planning to use in the next 12 months. So again, this just kind of helps us with engaging topics for these webinars and can also confirm kind of what we're seeing in the cloud world as well. So we'll give you guys just a minute to answer that piece. Okay, so we're just about done with that. I'll give you guys just a couple more seconds here, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide.
I'm dying to see the results.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and move on. All right, and there are results there. So it looks like we have a bit of a variation in those results. So that's, again, good for us to kind of know as we're kind of doing these webinars, and then also at the same time lets us have some insight into kind of what you guys are thinking as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right back into it. And Mike, if you want to move on to the next slide there.
Yeah, of course.
And I think he's going to talk a little bit about some of the data security and how it transcends the cloud.
There we go. Just waiting for the animation to catch up. Yeah, so this is just, very quickly, our belief, and we saw some of these results in the poll. It's hard for me to see in the audience view, but it looked like kind of the balance was either on-prem or hybrid in terms of the approach people anticipate or are using today. And, our point is, restricted and regulated information needs to be secured no matter where it is. Right, and you need to have an overall strategy and an overall framework to secure information, and then sort of overlay and adapt that framework based on the different operating environments, right? Be they on-premises, private, public, or hybrid environments. So another poll here. Do the folks on the webinar today feel that they or their organization has a strategy for securing information? So it looks like, yep, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it looks like we've got our results there, and it looks like about half are no, and the other half are either I don't know or yes. So certainly some interesting results, and glad you guys are on this webinar then.
Yeah, and we always appreciate the candor too, right? Because it is an important topic, and folks need to understand where they are. And then sort of a follow-on, just sort of a rhetorical statement would be, all right, if you do have a strategy, if you're responsible for these types of environments, SharePoint on premises, SharePoint in private, clouds, Office 365, have you thought about how that strategy would apply to those environments? No poll on that one. We'll get it done through. So this is my very high level take on what an information security program should look like. So you have things like PCI DSS, which is a security standard for folks that process or store credit card information. You have the security rules for HIPAA, which is around patient privacy. You have different frameworks like ISO 27001 and NIST 800-53, right? You have all these things. This is actually something that I've personally used a number of times to help a service provider get through due diligence for a large customer. So I think it applies just sort of universally, and having used it in kind of from the cloud service provider side, I think it's also a nice, very focused way to think through what are the different categories of security, especially when you're looking at, again, hybrid or all-in sort of public-private cloud environments. And we'll quickly walk through these categories. Again, very high level. When Jesse and I were going through this, we sort of all agreed we could do a webinar just on, any one of these blocks in here.
Absolutely. And one of the things I just like to point out there is that, it's nice when people have an information security program, but one of the things that I find is that, while it's great to have one, I find that a lot of people then never train on it. And, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but, if you don't train on it, then that program doesn't do you a lot of good, or, they may have a program, but unfortunately it only applies to their network staff, which isn't really fully an information security program as it needs to apply to all staff. So, again, I'm sure we'll talk further on that, but just a couple things to point out.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? You have that human block in there. If you think of this not necessarily as how it's described here, but really if you put these in sequence and they are all links in the chain, people are one of the links, and if that link breaks, the whole thing sort of falls apart. So we'll get into this. I had another thought, but it just lost me. It's okay. So that top bar, right? Overall principles and controls. So these are things that basically could apply to anything, right? Be it data or the servers, applications, networks, etc. And so these are just sort of basic design principles or sort of cultural type things. And a lot of these can be pretty basic, I think, for folks. So one is least privileged design, which is basically trying to eliminate single points of failure when it comes to access to things, right? Access to, hard copy documents, access to, the ability to configure a device, whatever. That kind of goes with separation of duties. So, if you think of how those are different, privilege is making sure you only have the amount of access you need to get something done. Separation of duties is making sure that the things that need to get done are practically and securely kind of distributed among the team. The next two, pretty basic, right? Everybody should have a unique user ID. They should be using that regardless of their role, regardless of what they're trying to do, so that you have accountability of who did what. In the Microsoft world, you've got the I see a lot of this with the SharePoint install account. Somebody stood up a SharePoint server using the install account, and now everybody who administers SharePoint uses that account, multiple times a day. Those are the types of things you don't want to do. And then, finally, at this point, complex passwords. And just my own little sort of trivia of the day. Basically a password greater than 12 characters is a lot better than an 8-character complex password. So if you folks have any kind of control over passwords, you'll actually be a lot better with a sort of normally constructed, easily remembered 13-character plus password than a crazy 8-character one.
It's not okay to write that down on the side of your monitor.
So. That's right. Yeah, you'll post it underneath the keyboard. Just Jesse, if you've got example, because I think when you talk about people who are doing hosting, least privileged design and separation of duties is a big part of those offerings. So Jesse, if you've got examples you want to bring to the table or chime in, please do so.
Sure. It's interesting, and again, with my background, as I started, in the support world, and I've been in the sales world, and created our retention team here as well. It's interesting how I've had to kind of go through those things, and how my access has slowly been taken away from me. Right, as I started as an engineer, I had full access to everything. As I moved to, on the relationship side, I needed to be able to do certain things, and now on the sales side, I pretty much can't do anything. Right, so it's pretty much how all that is separated, and what access you give your company, especially the hosting company. It's very important because we have customers privileged information, so it's very important for us to follow that and to make sure that we have that segregation of who has access to what, and to make sure the processes are in place that when somebody does move positions, not just when somebody leaves. Right, I find that a lot of companies that somebody moves from one position to another, which happens very frequently, and maybe they move from an engineering role to some other role on the business side as a business analyst, yet they still have full access to all those environments. I know I've worked for several companies in the past where I've done that, and I'm still a system admin on some of their, these very, private things that I've kind of have to go and point that out to people. So it's just something to very much so keep in mind if you're doing this on-premise, or even if you're working with people in a public or private cloud environment.
Yeah, and obviously if you're dealing with a cloud service provider, they should be able to, or rather a private cloud service provider, ask all these questions, right? We'll get into that. We've got a whole section on due diligence. What you'll find with the public service providers, public cloud service providers, is some of them do better than others in terms of documenting these things in detail. So moving on, and again, each of these blue boxes on the left could be a webinar unto itself. But just providing examples so people sort of understand. So these are all your sort of what I think more traditional technical security controls. So the network section is things like your firewalls and segmenting networks, right? Don't have production servers and development servers sort of on the same network segment, right? You want to really strongly isolate those. Monitoring network behavior, right? Looking for attacks not only coming into your network but within your network. Penetration testing and vulnerability scanning. So for folks who don't know the difference, so penetration testing is basically having typically a third party try and break in, right? Hey, here is the attack surface that we've exposed to the internet. Try and break it. And then vulnerability scanning is a lot more of an overall thing of periodically, more proactively, trying to patch, identify which systems aren't patched or which systems aren't properly configured, so you can fix that before a, either authorized or unauthorized penetration test. I say that somewhat facetiously. Intrusion detection, that sort of bleeds in with network monitoring, but intrusion detection can also happen on the host side, and looking at logs on your systems and those types of things. Obviously, vulnerability scanning goes hand in hand with patch management. If you find a vulnerability, patch it. And then things like antivirus and anti-malware. Haven't touched much on the data side, which is really sort of the thrust of this. But data is going to include things like data retention, destruction. How do people decommission hard drives? Do they use data at rest encryption? Do they use encryption of data in flight, where are they using encryption of data in flight? Is it between the servers or just from the web server to the user? All those kinds of things, including things like data loss prevention or data leakage prevention, which is basically, sort of a philosophy at this stage, but it's also, there are specific DLP technologies out there that basically, look at traffic flying across the network and say, well, this looks like it's traffic that shouldn't be leaving our network. So again, a lot in there, but just sort of introducing some of the things we're talking about so folks sort of wrap their head around when we're talking about a strategy, we're talking about a program, really the types of things you need to be thinking of. I'll back up. So, I mean, relative to SharePoint, you can kind of see how this all comes in, right? If, on the network side, if you have a web application that's exposed to the internet, instead of just extending the web application and punching a hole in your firewall, you should actually set up a dedicated web server for that, put it in the DMZ, put some, content filtering devices and anti-malware and antivirus devices around that, et cetera. That web front end, that software should be running on a server that's hardened and patched and continually patched and scanned for vulnerabilities. When you install SharePoint, you should, follow some checklist, and there are ones out there from NIST that are pretty good. You should do things like disable the install account after you've installed SharePoint. Do not disable the loopback check, right? Data, you should look into, encryption, rates management, which I'm sort of less confident is actually practically usable. Data loss prevention if you have it, et cetera, et cetera. Device security is more on the end user side, a little squishier these days, right, with BYOD and those things. But just putting that all through the SharePoint lens. This is all stuff you do. You don't have to do it before you stand SharePoint up. It's a lot easier if you do it that way. So then on the physical and human, building access control, visitors log. So the difference between walking into somebody's office and just kind of being able to roam the halls versus having a reception desk, and there's really no way to walk past that desk without being seen, stopped, challenged, having to sign in, maybe have your ID, checked, get a visitor badge, those kinds of things. Physical data center security, I'll let Jesse kind of come back and talk about that. That's an area where any kind of cloud service provider should just be absolute nails. They should have physical data center security down pat. It should be like Fort Knox to get into that thing. And then you have things like employee screening. If you're a financial services organization or you're going to do business with a financial services organization, there's a lot more you have to do in the realm of employee screening than than is typical. So we're talking about your organization is going to have their own sort of process for that. Depending on what information you're putting in these cloud environments, you're going to want to look into, okay, is your cloud service provider doing any employee screening, and what does that look like? And then Jesse had mentioned, humans are one of the links in the chain. So if you're going to have a program, some amount of responsibility is going to fall on the employees. You need to go into this, I think, with some practicality, right? So some of the best employee awareness training I've been in really reduced to, hey, if you see somebody that you don't recognize, walk up to them and ask them if you can help them, because we just don't want random people walking around our building. When you put too much of an onus of security on your employees, it's not going to work real well. I've got friends of mine who are very, very seasoned, kind of security consultants and things like that. They do employee awareness training because you kind of have to, but they think it's an absolute waste of time. And I think that's just because at times people try and expect, quite honestly, too much. Employees are paid to produce a work product. Security is not always sort of job one for them, right? So you have to set expectations properly. Again, when you're talking about somebody like Fpweb or you're talking about a cloud service provider, security is absolutely job one for them. So again, different expectations based on the scenario that we're talking about. Again, if you put this through the lens of SharePoint, building access control is what it is. There's a difference between putting sensitive information in a SharePoint form that's in a closet in a remote office versus your corporate data center for that second bullet. Employee screening, again, more of an organizational thing, but when you get to employee awareness training, this falls under just SharePoint governance. How are users going to request a site? When they request a site, what kind of use case descriptions do they have to do? And then based on those descriptions, what training do they have to go through so that they can properly manage their SharePoint site? Those types of things to not create additional risk for the organization.
Sure. Mike, I'll go ahead and jump in here real quick.
Yeah,
to give you a break. Just to kind of talk about the overall data center security, and again, I've seen quite a few different data centers, and there are multiple levels involved there that you need to think about from if you're doing this on-prem or you're working with a cloud provider of any type. We try to make sure that our customers are comfortable and do on-site tours with us and things like that. So, again, it all starts with your security team at the front. I don't want my security guards to be more like a greeter at the Gap, right? I don't want them to be that super friendly. They need to be questioning and understanding why people are there, because we do have our customers' data. And then your next layer is making sure that you have the proper badges to get even into an elevator, to get to a level that has that. And then once you come out, you've got to make sure that they're biometrics, to where you have fingerprint and ocular scanning and all of that. And it's funny, I talk to people and they just don't really realize the level of security that's required to meet the certifications that are out there. So there's a lot involved with that, and you certainly want to make sure that your data center provider can keep up with all of that as well. So again, there's some good ones, there's some bad ones out there, but certainly do your due diligence and make sure if you are going to move to a cloud-based environment that they have that secure data center.
Yeah, and all the things that you described, Jesse, are after you've submitted a ticket 60 days in advance and gone through the change review board, even be able to walk through that stuff, right? So then, sort of the final pieces here: compliance and incident response. So you'll notice that I am kind of I am including compliance as part of security. It's sort of a perennial debate. Are they different? Is one better than the other, et cetera, et cetera? They're intertwined, right? So compliance is going to be, what does your organization have to contend with? I mean, it could be everything from your standard sort of industry type regulations around payment card industry or healthcare or Department of Defense, higher ed, those kinds of things. It could be Sarbanes-Oxley, maybe not for the entire organization, but for an aspect, for certain systems that are in scope. And what we see, well, I'll come back to that. And then incident response is basically, okay, what are we going to do if we think something went wrong? That's different from a breach, right? So if you see something suspicious, that is an incident. You handle an incident, you look at it, you investigate it, and then you determine if it is a breach or not. That could also cover disaster recovery, right? A server going down is an incident, and how you respond to that. And then obviously you want to test that. And these are things where it's real easy to write the policy. It's harder to follow that policy, right? And then it's even in sort of another level of effort, to test those unexpected things and to provide evidence that you're doing all these things. And again, this is where cloud service providers should be very mature. That third bullet there, your organization may not have to go through third-party auditing and accreditation. Most cloud providers, public or private, will, and they'll typically hang all those logos off of their website. I was just reading an article yesterday about kind of consumer health information, and with all these things like Fitbit and these different apps for tracking your calorie intake and things like that, these are all basically cloud providers, broadly speaking, that have regulated information, patient information. They don't actually fall under the regulation because they're not a HIPAA covered entity, and really people are using these things without any idea of what these organizations' information security program looks like, if they even have one. And unlike the consumer space, in the business world, we tend to see people moving. And yeah, Jesse, jump in. But we tend to see people moving discrete sort of business processes into the cloud. Our finance team needs to start doing something a little bit differently, or they have requests that our IT shop is just not sort of geared to service right now. So we're going to take that request for service or that existing thing, and we're going to move it into the cloud. And that's where now you have to say, okay, well, what's the business impact? What's the importance of this information and the availability of the service to the organization, right? Da, 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 da. Yeah, Jesse, I'm not sure what you all see in terms of these types of things. The third-party accreditation that you and your peers tend to go through, and sort of initials that folks should look for.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have our data center certifications like our SSAE 16s and our ISO 27001s and things like that. And again, a lot of our customers require the HIPAA stuff where we've got to sign off on their BAAs and our business associate agreements, and so that's all well and good. The big piece I like to bring out in a lot of that is these are organizational type things, right? So I can encrypt all the data, and I can certainly lock down the environment technically. But in the end, what I like to point out is that the end users aren't following the protocols that have kind of been put in place on the business side. It won't matter how locked down that system is. So I like to think of it as an organizational security program, right? It's not just on your IT staff or just even on your hosting company. Your IT staff or someone like us could lock it down. But if you've got people going in there that have access to those documents and they're emailing them out and things like that, then there's almost a way to get through all of that if they're not actually following that training or they haven't been properly trained on that employee side. So it's just one of the things I like to point out, because we have a lot of people that come to us and go, okay, we're completely HIPAA certified. And it's like, yes, you are from a technology perspective, but what training are you doing internally to make sure that your staff knows and understands those protocols and procedures?
That's right. Yeah. For as long as I've been in this business, I've had prospects come to me and say, hey, will this make us compliant, or is your system compliant in this way? My response is always, as I said, look, those compliance regimes are an organizational accreditation. Here's how our technology can help you meet certain aspects of that, right? So yes, we can help you get there, and here's the bang for the buck on that. But there's this whole other stuff that you've got to do and do continuously. And again, so if you look at the information on this slide through the lens of SharePoint, how are you planning for disaster recovery when it comes to SharePoint? And are you testing that periodically? Do you understand the business processes that SharePoint is helping to fulfill, and the impact to the business if those processes are unavailable or compromised? How are you sort of mapping SharePoint and its operation, configuration, and use up against your corporate information security policy? And Jesse mentioned ISO 27001. A lot of times people will just take that off the shelf, tweak it a little bit, and that's their corporate information security policy. That's totally fine. After this webinar, Google ISO 27001, and you will see what a giant document it is. So the fact that organizations like Fpweb, and their peers, can hold themselves to that standard and NIST 800 and SSAE 16, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Very few sort of non-hosting organizations can have the business justification to satisfy all those things all the time. Third-party, auditing and accreditation. In federal circles, you might see this where they've got to get a protection level for the SharePoint farm. And then finally, a designated compliance officer or team. We're seeing more of this, over time. But SharePoint, because it is so specialized, people aren't used to thinking about SharePoint in the same way they might think about SAP or the big ERP systems. But SharePoint is a business platform. It's an enterprise business platform. And historically, it's been kind of a fiefdom, and there wasn't that engagement between the SharePoint teams and the security and compliance teams. That's changing quickly, but again, make sure you're doing that. If you own the SharePoint or Office 365, environment, understand what's going on in there. You can do it just by walking down the hall and asking your users, hey, what types of things are you doing? And if you see smoke, go sort of talk to the folks who are responsible for compliance, for your organization.
So I know we're coming up actually on our time here, so we'll have to fly through some of these slides.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to move on to that next one. I don't want to keep everybody too late here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jesse. So basically just breaking these down and showing, okay, how does a program evolve or adapt as you move to these different environments? So on-premises is blank because basically your organization is responsible for everything. And then these icons kind of indicate who's who can provide what. And if it's blank on these private and public cloud columns, that indicates that there's a gap. And the reason I have a gap on the public cloud, those environments are entirely accessed and managed via the public internet. You cannot secure the public internet. So I just left that as a gap. Where it says shared, that basically means when you're in a private cloud environment, they're going to do some things. You've got to understand where that line of demarcation is, and then adapt. And the reason it's different from private to public is in a private cloud environment, they will allow you to put third-party things on there. They will do some customization or allow you to do some customization. So you have to talk through who's going to be responsible for that. In a public cloud environment, it's here it is, right? Here's the application. We're going to maintain it. We're going to configure it, et cetera. And then it really becomes the next thing. What's the data you're putting in there and how is that being accessed? Device, no cloud provider is going to do anything for device security for you. At least in the context that we're talking about here in terms of SharePoint and server hosting. And down on compliance and incident response again, let's say there's an incident in the cloud. What is your cloud service provider's responsibility to notify you and include you in that, allow you to come in and do forensics? Because at the end of the day, your customers are expecting you to be responsible for the information. They're not as concerned about who you have to be partnered with sort of on the back end, right? They're looking at it as it's your service. It's, I'm giving you my information. You have to do a good job with it. Yeah, and sorry for racing here. I thought we had 60 minutes, so my fault. So just a couple things here. Some on-premises controls break when you move to the public cloud anyway. Things like data loss prevention. If you think of data loss prevention, its sole intention is to tell you when information is leaving your enterprise. If you are taking information from your enterprise and putting it into a public cloud environment, it is by nature leaving your enterprise. Very difficult to do data loss prevention. Whether or not data loss prevention breaks in a private cloud is subjective, and there are ways that you can get there so that it doesn't break if you need it to not break. Same thing with network access control. If you're talking about an environment that's exclusively accessed over the public internet, it's hard to do network access control. If you need network access control and you want to move to the cloud, these are the types of things that are going to drive you to private cloud because, it's more flexible, there's more adaptability. You can only make that private cloud environment accessed via a VPN. You can have firewall rules to control, where those VPN clients come from. You can have certificates, all those things. Network perimeter, same thing. Public cloud environment, there is no perimeter. Private cloud, you kind of have the ability to define your perimeter a little bit. Due diligence, huge thing, right? Trust but verify. You don't want to take at face value that organizations are doing it well. Look for some of those certifications that Jesse had mentioned, SSAE 16. Safe Harbor, PCI DSS, HIPAA High Tech, all those things. And you want to kind of talk to your cloud providers. Now again, private cloud, very much a dialogue. Public cloud, you're going to be really mostly at the whim of what they publish. Microsoft does a really good job of publishing what they're doing, whether you like it or not is different. Google, less so. Box and Dropbox, it really sort of drops off the map after that. I think folks like Jive, when I look, don't publish really much of anything. So a lot of folks really just kind of keep it at the marketing level. They don't get into detail. You can get into detail with a private cloud. Microsoft is more friendly, but still it's all going to be mostly based on what they're willing to publish. But again, kind of here's some topics, but really the topics are those categories that we talked about before. So, kind of talking about it really doesn't have to be public cloud, but, I'm just kind of showing the ends of the pendulum here. So private and public cloud, superior economies of scale. Now they get those to different degrees of cookie cutter, right? So the Fpwebs of the world are going to get great economies of scale on patch management, network security, server builds, all those types of things. But they are going to allow you to customize, right? So there's going to be a cost to that. You can configure your different service levels, those kinds of things. The Microsofts, Googles of the world just say, here it is, right? Here's the service level. Here's the functionality of the application, and they're able to get, very low-cost offerings as a result of sort of that lack of flexibility. Again, highly limited ability to do due diligence. I think with a lot of public cloud providers, some are better than others. They're definitely not all the same. Ability to customize. So these are the types of things you need to ask yourself when it comes to public versus private, right? If these are things that cause you concern for certain use cases, then they're probably not applicable for public cloud, or they're not applicable for public cloud sort of as it is. You've got to figure out ways to augment the security of that cloud offering. Lower service levels. Again, if you look at folks like Fpweb, you can typically have them architect a solution that is always up. The public cloud, not so. So if you look at that, calculate out how much downtime a year is this going to be, what's the impact of that downtime, does that offset the cost savings here, right? So those are all the types of things. And a big thing that I personally am getting very interested in is compelled disclosures. Public cloud providers are big targets for opposing counsel for foreign and domestic governments, right? It's the old adage, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Why do you subpoena public cloud providers? That's where the data is. So not picking specifically on this company here, but this is sort of an example of trust but verify. I don't even know what Venture 360 would have in terms of my data. I don't have an account with them, so it doesn't matter. But I just got a kick out of this, right? Is your data secure? Sure is. Yeah, we're going to talk about this later, right? So folks have a tendency to gloss over and just do this at a very high level. And when you're talking about moving data from your enterprise to somewhere else, the last thing you want to do is run across this. And Microsoft does it too, is the point of this. So this was something that was presented at the Worldwide Partner Conference the other week. And it really bothered me because I sort of categorize it as lawyer speak. And again, I think Microsoft is better than most of the public cloud providers in terms of transparency, in terms of accurately describing their controls. But what bugged me about this slide is every one of these statements is true, but if you change one word or delete one or two words, you get a very different picture of what's going on. And I'll show you that here, but my point is, thankfully, Microsoft actually gives you the resources to go find out for yourself what's going on. Not everybody does. And again, if you have concerns in that area, you need to go into this with your eyes wide open. If you're going to go to private hosted SharePoint or SharePoint Online or something else, again, you've got to have a strategy to secure that environment, secure that data. You've got to really dig. Don't take the marketing fodder at face value. So if you kind of remember some of the things on the marketing slide, Microsoft says they don't give unfettered access to governments. Well, it's true they don't, but they do provide information 79% of the time. So it's not 100, which would be unfettered, but it's not 0, which is kind of what they're trying to imply from a marketing standpoint. They also said they don't have any backdoors. We don't need them because there's a swath of Microsoft employees that have access to all your information. So you don't need a backdoor. And again, it's hard to provide controls around administrator access to information in a public cookie cutter environment. So you have these concerns. Again, you've either got to look for a different kind of offering or you've got to augment things. And you'll get these after this, so you can go and read for yourself. And I really would encourage you to read this. Look to see what other cloud service providers. If you're looking at an offering from something like an Fpweb, engage them in a conversation and really dig into this because it's very, very important. Again, based on the impact of the use case that you're talking about having hosted.
No, and just to jump in real quick, again, I would completely agree with that. I try to at least engage our customers in that conversation as well to really find out what they're trying to do as well. Again, we have sometimes where customers will come to us and they don't have any PII, but they're really trying to lock it down. And that's one of those scenarios where we just, need to make sure we understand their business cases and their needs. So yeah, certainly engage whoever we're working with.
Yeah, and then sort of the crux of this is basically the perception of trust is going to swing, right, in the opposite direction of the cost efficiencies. So really what you need to do is basically, why you saw a lot of people in the poll are considering hybrid, because there's a lot to be had from the cost efficiencies, right? If you look at SharePoint and remote block storage, the basic notion was, don't use super expensive storage for something that doesn't need it. Exactly here, don't use, lots of security and due diligence and, high computing and high administrative overhead for information that, you're not really all that concerned about. If it's not confidential, if it doesn't need to be available all the time, yeah, put it in the public cloud. And you'll see that you have, different information can be handled and hosted differently. And again, this sort of ties to, a strategy. So your strategy needs to account for this, right? If I have a strategy to secure data, then that can also drive sort of tactics around what data can go where, and what business processes are allowed to exist in which operating environments. So here, just kind of calling out the gaps. Excuse me. Again, public cloud. My argument is there is no network security because the network is the internet. So the fact that you can access this stuff from anywhere. You can do things like use third-party encryption. You can try and federate your entitlements and your access and identity management. That can help. You can push agents out to devices to kind of do some web filtering and some anti-malware type of things. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and if you don't have the infrastructure or the budget to go get the infrastructure to offset some of these things, then you either have to go another route like private or leave it on-prem, or just kind of choose to live with the risk, right? And depending on the amount of risk, that's a valid decision. Data security. I kind of look at this as there are three main options. You have data encryption, rights management, and data loss prevention. Rights management really just doesn't scale beyond a small and highly motivated, user group. Lots of information about that on the internet. Folks on the call have probably had experience. It's a very promising technology, and it has gotten easier to deploy. It's the usability of it that is the issue. So then you're kind of left with, I think, the other things, which are, encryption and data loss prevention. Microsoft is coming out with some DLP capabilities in Office 365. They're basically extending what's been in Exchange. Again, it is what it is. Microsoft isn't a security company. I think that will help meet some very basic requirements. But if you talk to enterprises, most of them aren't using the DLP functionality that's in Exchange. They've gone and procured other things. So you just have to go into that with the right expectations. It's probably going to be just okay. It's not going to handle anything I'd say from sort of the medium to complex side of requirements. The other thing you run into, especially with public cloud, DLP is based on regular expressions. There are so many more factors once you start moving to public cloud, and regular expressions just aren't going to do a good job, quite honestly. That sort of approach is really more effective in the on-premises or the private cloud world. Data encryption, it's one of CipherPoint's the features of our product, just to be candid. It's an effective control. It's also highly subjective based on the ownership of the encryption keys and where in kind of the data flow the encryption happens. A lot of public and private cloud providers will say, hey, we encrypt all your data at rest. Well, that's fine, but if it's just encrypted in disk and it's decrypted anytime it's read from those disks, you've really only addressed physical security of the disk drives. And as Jesse was talking about, physical security in these environments is really, really good. So data encryption to deal with physical security, probably not super effective, again, given the attack surface is the public internet. Device security, we kind of covered that. If you're looking at sort of a server, infrastructure or a SharePoint, application infrastructure environment, you're not going to get anything in terms of device security. So if that's a concern for you relative to BYOD, whole another initiative. We talked a little bit about compliance and incident response. Again, you need to do it. You need to adapt. If you don't have policies, go get them, right? And then you need to adapt those policies for private and public cloud scenarios. In the public clouds, hopefully somewhere the cloud provider has some verbiage on how they handle incidents and what your rights to be notified or to go in and audit to see if they've had any incidents but didn't tell you, what your rights are in that regard. Again, Microsoft better than others. I think they're generally just more business friendly. They kind of understand what people are going to want to see. Again, whether you like the answers or not is up to you. In the private cloud, the Fpwebs of the world, again, much more of a dialogue. Hey, here's what we do. And Jesse, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm imagining, certain aspects of that can be negotiated if you need different audit rights or you need a better response time or those kinds of things.
Yep, absolutely, Mike. That's one of the things that, again, is having the advantage of that private cloud is we're a little more flexible in what we can kind of do even from customer to customer. So absolutely, that's something that we work with individual customers on and try to work with what their business needs are.
Yep, and I'm getting the hook here, but Jesse touched on this earlier when it comes to data security. I say, it's a whole gap in the public cloud because they're basically saying, here's the infrastructure, use it as you will. We'll handle your data according to these things that we've gotten accreditation for, but that's it. In a private cloud, again, there's at least the opportunity to have a dialogue to say, well, here are our data security requirements. Here are the ones we would like you, private cloud provider, to fulfill, and you can talk about that. Again, at the end of the day, as Jesse said, somebody is going to provide something for you. There will be a line of demarcation. In public cloud, that responsibility is sort of fixed. In private cloud, it's somewhat movable, but you have to be cognizant of what your organization is still responsible for. Some of that is compliance, some of that is customer expectation, and your customers may just be, the department down the hall that has asked you to provide SharePoint for them.
Okay, so I think that's going to take us to Q&A, but before we get into that, just wanted to go ahead and quickly stop and announce the winner of the Windows 8 Pro software, and that winner is Ben Kelly. So Ben, we will be reaching out to you offline, and we'll make contact for that piece. So now is basically the time to go ahead and ask Mike or myself whatever questions are on your mind. We've got a few that are already kind of teed up for us, so I'll go ahead and start with this one. What are some of the key security challenges one should think of for Office 365 today within or outside of the principles and controls you mentioned? So, Mike, I don't know if you want to kind of jump in a little bit on that one.
Yeah, so I've got sort of, in the interest of time, I'd break it into two categories. One, again, a big one for me, on a professional, personal level, is compelled disclosures. Moving information, sort of the industry moving information at scale into the public internet has made it easy for third-party organizations to get their hands on it. Through legal means. I mean, what makes this country great is sort of the rule of law, right, and the equitable treatment we get under that. So it's no surprise that cloud providers have to do this, right? But, it's your information. You need to own it, right? You should not lose ownership of it by giving it to a cloud provider. And then the other one is the access from anywhere. The fact that really anybody who has an internet connection can at least attempt to access your information becomes an issue. Specific to Office 365, I think Microsoft has done a good job of providing secure architecture. An example of something that scares me is the setting in SharePoint online to allow external sharing. Because once you do that, you just say, hey, I'm going to allow external sharing. Somebody can invite somebody into this. At that point, you have no control over the authentication provider, password complexity, where that user accesses their stuff from, et cetera, their awareness training, all those sort of human and compliance type things. Now, you can just turn that off, but once you turn it open, big issues there.
Great. And then we're going to do another question here. This one is going to be, any cloud provider encrypts the data or traffic, who owns the encryption keys? For Office 365, does Microsoft own the encryption keys as well? And then if so, is there a way that the customer or third party owns them rather than Microsoft or the vendor, the hosting vendor?
Yeah, well, I can take it. So Fpweb, I think will give you options. I can tell you what I've sort of seen, heard, read about Microsoft. So Microsoft is doing a hardware upgrade right now so that they can deploy BitLocker in their Office 365 environment. BitLocker is a very low-level encryption technology. It basically does disk-level encryption. And in kind of Microsoft's own words, it really just protects somebody from getting access to their data center and pulling out a drive. Again, due to physical security, some of the other things they're doing in terms of spraying blocks of data all over the place, it's not really effective if you're trying to actually address some threats with encryption. They've talked about an offering called Fort Knox, which might be that organizations can bring their own encryption key. They're starting to do that with Azure RMS as well. But the reality is, they don't, the way BitLocker works, they don't even really need access to the encryption key because the data will always get decrypted anytime they want to access it. So the only way to use encryption to overcome some of these issues with public cloud providers is to encrypt it before it hits their environment and for you to own the key and for you to own the crypto function. That's the only way to use encryption to overcome those concerns.
Great, thanks, Mike. I think what we'll do is there's a couple other questions. What we'll do is we'll take those offline and make sure we get those answered for you. Before we thank everybody here, just wanted to say a shameless plug here that our next Fpwebinar will be on Thursday, August 28th. The topic is going to be securing the legal industry, so streamline collaboration and secure content for e-discovery. So again, make sure to kind of tune into that. Lastly, I do want to thank everybody for joining us today, and then also thank Mike for providing his expertise around this subject. I know we squeezed you a bit on time there, but also if everyone, when you exit the webinar, if you please fill out the survey. Again, it just kind of tells us what we need to cover in the future webinars. And Mike, I know you had a couple things you wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just our own shameless plug. Every year we do a survey about security concerns related to SharePoint, Office 3, now more Office 365, things like that. We publish the results. We do a whole sort of report on what we saw, trends year over year. So really appreciate folks taking that survey. The link to it is in the chat pane. We haven't hit the first people yet. We're getting really close, but the first 50 to do a completed survey will get a gift card. Everybody that does complete one's entered to win a $50 gift card. Depending on how many people submit, we might end up giving away more than one of the 50. But very interesting, helps everybody sort of understand what's going on at an industry level. So we'd really appreciate folks taking the time to help us out with that.
Great. All right, I think that'll do it for us today. Again, thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again on August 28th. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Be well.